Hello and welcome to this week's edition of the ID5 podcast. Today, I'm super excited to welcome one of the legend of the digital advertising space, early founder of Poindexter System and X+1, if some of you remember those names, who then went on obviously to launch MediaMath's and lead the company to one of the biggest kind of buy-side platform and one of the most respected company in the space. I'm sure you've all recognized Joe Zawadzki. Joe, welcome to the 85 podcast.
I'm honored to be here. That was a gracious opening, so off to a good start.
Great. So let's get started and let's get straight into the topic, right? This podcast is titled very pompously future-proofing digital advertising, and so I want to understand how you look at this kind of future-proofing, right? And first maybe start by asking you the question of whether or not you think digital advertising is growing sustainably, right? How do you look at that topic of sustainability?
Yeah, it's such a powerful word, it's a strong, good leading question because I think the answer is obvious, perhaps, but growing, yes. Fundamentally important, yes. The center not just of advertising but of marketing, and marketing being the center of what differentiates companies in the go forward. Probably more than any other discipline in an organization. Yes. Growing sustainably, not yet. No, not yet. It's I think you and I have certainly talked about this, but the fact that the industry has sort of evolved over call it a 20-year sweep, and it's done it really through the interstitial relationships between independent companies and each other, right? There has been some work, especially in the last, call it 5 years, of more clarity around standards, more expectation that people adopt them. Things like the an ads.txt or sellers.json, or now some of the work out of the IB Tech Lab, and you're seeing the output of both an increased amount of investment in digital advertising, and then also the kind of need for standardization coming out in in the output of those forums. But one of the realities is there's no there's neither a requirement to adopt those things by sort of date certain, nor in a lot of cases is there auditing that comes as part of it, right? So it's a it's sort of an opt-in approach to the industry. And so you wake up and you realize that 51% of every advertising dollar is digital, and the underlying marketplace structure itself was evolved and not designed in things that are obvious, right? Things like, hey, where's the third-party cookie 20 years ago wasn't supposed to be the backbone of $500 billion industry, and again, the most important sort of discipline in sort of the corporate function. But it's become that, right? And a lot of the kind of known cracks in the we talk about the supply chain, and whether it's the ability for bad actors to introduce fraud through sort of automated systems, if it's metrics and measurement, like a lot of these things just kind of evolved, and the sort of the industry sort of built itself around them, and that's not sustainable. It's not sustainable in theory. And then I think, as we've seen in the both regulation and in sort of competition, not sustainable in practice, right? Like there is a finite shelf life to business as usual. And I think over the next 12 to 24 months, what we're really doing is redesigning the underpinnings of a market while it's active, while it's live. So proverbial planes in the air.
Yeah, exactly. Change the engine. We're going through this kind of move towards sustainability. We're going through this kind of maturation process, right? Early kind of 10, 15 years, bit of a crazy industry, right? Innovation everywhere, right? No, like divergent rather than kind of converging towards like a common, stable foundation.
Yep.
So like, yeah, kids, right? Like growing up, right? Teenagers, now you're getting to mature. And now like the industry's maturing and becoming adults in a way, right? And kind of looking more like planning for retirement, looking more long term, right? And so we're in this process. That's what you're saying, right? Past 5 years, next 2 to 3 years, right? We're going through this maturation phase. We're going through this kind of redesigning of the industry to kind of put ourselves into a kind of 30-year mindset and not a 30 months mindset. Is that a good summary?
That is well put. Yep.
Okay. And so
time to get out of the gangly adolescence.
Yeah. It feels like a long time ago though. So that's I totally subscribe to that, and I very much agree with you in that kind of maturation process. What areas you mentioned supply chain, right? I mean, there's obviously a lot of areas where we haven't built sustainability because we've left too much margins for bad actors, as you're saying, or like approximations, or kind of features made out of bugs or whatever, like things that are not fully industrial, right? What are those areas that you're seeing where maturation is happening or needs to happen so that we become more kind of long-term focused and more sustainable?
Yeah, look, I mean, at the risk of appearing to sort of talk my book, as I think Wall Street traders may still say, although I may have aged out of that one as well. I will share the source principles because that is our attempt to kind of distill what everybody has been talking about in a lot of ways for quarters or years, and really try to create a framework that then allows the industry to sort of write to a shared sense of destination, right? Like where we all sort of individually and collectively sort of trying to go. And so I think people will sometimes use different words, but I think the underlying sentiment is, quite consistent across the, certainly the enterprise. So like the Fortune 2000 and the sort of, born digital BTC sort of, people we think of as, they and their sort of agencies as clients, right? And then the sort of media technology and sort of data ecosystem and sort of partners around it. And so if you kind of distill that and say, all right, we talk about accountability, we talk about addressability, and we talk about alignment. Those are, I think, good words, not just because they all start with the same letter, right? But they actually unpack to, I think, something that most people would be like, yeah, no, you kind of nailed, the sort of package.
Yeah,
so
most of the known issues can fit into those those three terms. Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And so things like accountability is transparency, right? There can be variations on this one. I mean, we take a strong view on transparency of, quite radical transparency, like actually be able to see all the flows throughout the transaction, all the actors involved, all the economics associated with that. Largely in the sense that if you can deliver that, clearly without any sort of opacity, then it becomes easier for the rebuilding in other areas, right? It's almost like a, perhaps necessary but insufficient. But if you have that sort of trust and transparency in the advertising backbone, then you're building on something, durable. So it's a good foundation. And other people may take different approaches. Our belief is that for the longer term view that we're talking about here, when you're kind of looking out and working backwards from 20 years from now, doing it on transparency is firm bedrock effectively. So transparency, right? It's also, cleaning up a lot of the, terms of trade that in a lot of cases in the industry, we're kind of left to individual actors to negotiate between commercial and legal, and things like data rights and things like flow of funds and discrepancies and reconciliation. A lot of the mechanics kind of below the waterline of how you actually get technology systems to talk to each other billions of times a day. Defining those relationships more precisely is sort of part of accountability, right?
Yeah.
Addressability, probably an area near and dear to your heart, I would imagine here, and that is, again, when we articulated these things a couple of years ago, it was a little like, hey, there's a gleam in the eye that we have to be really, really clear and prescriptive almost on how the use of identity sort of flows across the supply chain or the ecosystem. And obviously now we're kind of in that mode of how exactly are you going to connect to a diverse set of screens and speakers, just kind of digital devices on a global basis, where the means by which that connection, first is accelerating because of regulation. To some extent, it's subject to competition, right? Apple's forays into advertising and sort of the sort of the changing of the rules there. Yes, privacy. Yes, also competition.
You call that competition. I call that abuse of dominant position, but we'll get to that in a minute.
There we go. But you sort of see the kind of need there for the whole value chain, right? Again, this like idealized or this framework for industry collaboration then needs to have a point of view about addressability, right? And so what does that mean in real life? Basically means working across our clients and our partners to help select the right ones, and I say ones because it's a plural answer. I think even a year ago, I think people were sort of waiting for the silver bullet. There's sort of there will be a new one that everyone will adopt en masse, and I think the reality now, everybody is like, no, portfolio solutions. We're going to have to have each one sort of working in its best screen or its best application use case, or in the region which it has the the most coverage and footprint, and of course that leaves plenty of places for folks that might be in the business of identity middleware or interoperability to help make those connections. So thank you for doing what you do, and then it's not just to select and stitch that together, but it's to help reinforce it. Right, so it's to help provide the signal back to a publisher to say, hey, this one it works for me, right? New Star Fabric ID is amazing, or LiveRamp is perfect in the following regions, and I really need Zeotap for Europe and other beyond, and then to be able to kind of reinforce that in the bidding behavior in order to then encourage the publisher to adopt that more, to have more buyers select that particular signal, and sort of come out of what might feel like hey, there's going to be 1,000 of these things, into what I think is a durable market structure of kind of natural oligopoly. Right, there will be a number of key players across each of the primary approaches, right? Open and closed, deterministic and probabilistic, basically. And you'll want to have 3 or 4 credible players in each one, such that you as a marketer have a reasonable sandbox across which to choose. So your pick 6 amongst 18 is a very different problem than pick 22 out of 180. Right, and we're in that point right now of starting the kind of market testing and validation and reinforcement in order to get to that more durable long-term state in called 24 months. And then if you thought that was confusing, the most challenging one I find to talk about is alignment, which is I'll go on a little bit of a rant, and if obviously if you're listening to this podcast, you kind of knew maybe what you get out of an open-ended conversation with me. But the whole industry has sort of been built around this zero-sum sense of how advertising worked, right? If you go back to pre-addressability, the way that an agency, for example, leveraged its scale was in pricing power and in clout, right? And an ability to sort of reduce the cost of a cog, right, of a commodity asset called media. And similarly true on the publisher side, right? If all you were selling were sort of lots of space, that made a lot of sense. And what we were really doing was sort of negotiating around CPMs, right? Volume and price trades.
Yeah. Yeah.
In the world of addressability, right, there's a huge degree of opportunity in the bringing of decisioning, right? If you serve me a bunch of ads for size small clothes, nope, not going to work for me, right? If you try to sell me a non-Tesla vehicle at this point, I am turning blind eye, right? There are a whole bunch of categories of products to which you shouldn't be advertising to me, and others, of course, in which I'm like eminently influenceable and sort of persuasive. For example, comfortable menswear at present has been a category in which I've gone from button-down shirts and slacks at the office to shorts and Birkenstocks most days, and so my consumption went massively up there and massively down there, right? And so that's a good idea. If you are Rhone or you are Outer Known or you are Faherty brands, please continue to advertise to me because I'm responding like basically on a daily basis, right? So in that fact is this idea that advertising is not zero sum, right? That there is value to be created in being, thoughtful about what an advertiser, a media property, a consumer, and in that troika, you've got to both create value and then you've got to find ways to share it. So it's this idea of like non-zero sum approaches to advertising, where if an advertiser could share on a trusted backbone more information about what they're actually trying to accomplish. Here's what a good customer looks like, right? Here's how I'm modeling lifetime value, right? Here are my by product level goals and constraints, right? Sometimes because of the math, sometimes because in a budget process that happened last year, it turned out that, I really need to drive product X as opposed to product Y based on profitability or based on market, expectations. And to the extent that you can share that with across the technology backbone with a trusted supplier that can then do things in order to drive that goal directly, then what happens is, just be able to deliver more, more media, be able to, the advertisers willing to pay a higher price because they're actually getting more value and more, quality. And it moves from something that, feels like a prisoner's dilemma, right? Where everybody's looking for the best price in this transaction, to a much more collaborative, hey, if I can give you information that then allows you to create better content, to program your pages more appropriately, to change my prioritization in the waterfall in order to make sure that I get more of what I'm looking for, buyer X, publisher Y, then you're creating a virtuous cycle, right? Then you're creating value and sort of sharing it. So that's really highfalutin and high level, right? What actually happens in real life is we're doing things like brain sync, right? And basically passing data into an SSP that is then using it to optimize their bidding, and then that sort of feedback comes back again to say, here's how much more you could have won if you did this as opposed to that. Here's sort of the depth of the kind of yield curve. Here's the publisher constraints. And doing it manually, then doing it with products, then leveraging AI, and sort of reinforcing this more virtuous approach to marketing, which again it's not crazy town. It's like, it sounds like Canadian capitalism or something, but it really is like a long-term way to build sustainability effectively in media.
And a lot of these great values, right, around accountability, addressability, alignment, there's an element of trust and then an element of collaboration in all of those topics, right? And so what you're saying basically, and I'm going to paraphrase and simplify, obviously, because if
Thank
I
you.
don't do that, you're going to take another 26 minutes out of the the time we have for the podcast. So a lot of trust and a lot of collaborations between brands, technology providers, publishers, right? That whole value chain to become more sustainable has to be more open, more trustworthy, and more kind of integrated with each other, more collaborative, right?
Yep.
So I'm going to throw a curveball here.
Yeah.
Is this something that, I mean, right now we're in a world where you have the open web on one end and you have the walled garden on the other end, right? Is this our chance to make the open web sustainable by building this kind of trusted, collaborative ecosystem that brands can really lean into? Because we know they're not gonna lean into the walled gardens, right? The walled gardens are gonna eat them alive. They're already done, right? They're everything but trustworthy and collaborative by design. So is this the direction for us? Is this the direction to support the open web going forward?
Yes. So I'm gonna try not to gobble up 26 minutes, but I think it's maybe if you come back and then simplify and make coherent, maybe we create something here. So I think that what have walled gardens done? Walled gardens have basically said, look, digital advertising is super powerful, super complicated. We're looking to deliver scale with simplicity. It's going to come with a whole bunch of trade-offs. You got to trust our metrics. You've got to put your dollars in and rent your customers back again. We're going to keep you on that sort of treadmill because perhaps rational self-interest, right? So that's that. Open web is you sort of call it is all right. How does everybody else recreate scale and simplicity? Understanding that not everyone can be governed through a bunch of acquisitions by one M&A department. And there isn't a term of service that wraps all those acquisitions into liberal data sharing, right? But instead, you actually have to create those connections company by company, right? And so, yes, the answer is this accountability, addressability, and alignment is one way to look at it. Is how do you recreate the benefits of the walled garden from the perspective of the the marketer and from the publisher without the trade-offs. Right, so it's obviously more work, and because you have to, coordinate the activities of lots and lots of actors, not just one. And I don't know anyone's been in an organization for enough time, but sometimes getting one organization to all move in one direction is sort of challenging enough, right? And doing it sort of industry wide is yet more so. When you come out of it, and we are in it, right? And that's the nice part about forcing functions. Right, where all these things would be nice ideas if you didn't have to do it, but we're in a situation right now where we literally have to do it. There is no alternative, and therefore you're seeing the acceleration in a lot of the areas that I know you and I've talked about before. But just collaboration is at an all-time high because no individual company can sort of solve for it themselves. So a lot of net new partnerships. A lot more recognition about how we all work together in service of one set of goals. Fine. The state after this, by the way, is having made the open web and rationalized it in a way that is a well-designed marketplace. It works for the all of the principles. I also use the principles connected with principles. Right, so ALS and LES. How do you make sure that the brand, the consumer, and the publisher, the media owner, are all satisfied as the the sort of vertices of the triangle, and then everybody in between is sort of in service of making that making it work and sort of expanding the area. There's nothing inherent about the walled gardens being not part of that. Right, so if you think that the walled gardens themselves, their sort of design choices are designed to be sort of value maximizing in a local maxima, right? In this moment in time, to the extent that the open web delivers scale, simplicity with trust, very easy to invite other people back into it and say, look, I as a Fortune 2000 brand, this is the way I like to spend my money. It gets the performance that I'm looking for. It does it in a way that I know respects the the consumer with whom I have sometimes a much longer relationship than any digital player, right? The IBMs and the JP Morgans have spent billions of dollars and decades creating this trusted relationship with the consumer, and the idea that it might be harmed by digital advertising was like, no, that's not a good trade-off, right? So get to the point where it's working, it's humming, people are voting with their wallets, and then becomes very easy to say, great, everybody should be at least more open, right? At least have sort of two ways for a quote walled garden to sort of participate. One, and they're sort of closed, we own the whole relationship, and one that says, hey, for parts of our stack, we're going to make sure we sort of support this sort of open model, and then let the market decide 5 years after that, at which point, yes, maybe you and I are in fact working on a retirement.
I think, okay, I take the optimistic view, and
the only way to get out of bed in the morning.
No, well, yeah, okay. And the other angle is like, I mean, they've become too big for their own goods anyway, and antitrust and regulation is going to take care of this, and so it's kind of parallel tracks, right? And I mean, do you think it's been a force to the maturation process we were talking earlier, right? Has this accelerated the maturation of the industry? Like, have we realized that actually, like, if we don't do something about this, if we don't think about this sustainably, if we don't think about this like long term for the benefits of the three principles you've mentioned, right? Which I love that vision of like us as an industry working for the benefit of the consumers, the brand, and the publisher and the media owner, right? And which I think is fundamentally different from the vision of the walled garden, which is like sucking up the value from all those principles and kind of centrally storing it, right? So have we been through this transition forced by the kind of the overwhelming dominance of Google, Facebook, Apple, or do you think it's unrelated?
No, it's definitely related. Yeah,
yeah,
it's definitely related. Yeah, I think the sense of the only way out is through, I think is sort of part of it. And there's only so long that you're a big media company, you're a Viacom, you're an NBC, and you realize, geez, like 97 cents of every incremental dollar is going to these other environments. And you're like, well, okay, can I continue to hire the people that I need to hire? Can I continue to build the content I need to build? Do I continue to have the distribution deals that I need to have, both legacy and streaming in the future, without the ability to grow, right? And if the answer is no, then you're like, okay, I need to rethink this, right? And I think marketers are the same thing. Like I've sort of realized this 51% thing is pretty important, right? There are a lot of things that you tolerate when the dollars are immaterial, right? And, digital's 5% of your budget. It's like, it's way more important to be, making sure that your Nielsen contract's up to date, your upfront processes, sort of ready to go. You get to 51% of a really, really big line item, and small inefficiencies, small cracks, like suddenly magnify into really, really large numbers.
Yeah.
And so you kind of have it coming from perhaps both sides of like, yeah, this needs to be rationalized. This needs to be sustainable. You got to have places to advertise tomorrow, right? Some of the things that were maybe particularly galling in 2020 was, you did have a period where, a lot of marketers, remember companies are just, constellations of people. Right. And so to some extent, they exhibit their own sort of foibles and, biases as a result. But people were scared, lockdowns happening in, sort of March of last year. And a lot of people sort of, tightened belts and said, look, for anything discretionary, let's just sit tight. And let me make sure my team can still make it to the office. And let me make sure my physical supply chain still allows me to like produce products and get them shipped to me. I mean, there were outages, in sort of Q2, Q3 last year. And what did people do? Well, in some cases, they said, like, I'm gonna, if I'm gonna block the following classes of, of advertising because I've got a dial, or things like, it was also charged political situation in the U.S. and a lot of people just like suppressed all political advertising, full stop. If there were anything related to politics, doesn't matter what side, doesn't matter what what product you're selling, just no, right? And then you're like, okay, well, what actually happened there? And some of the things that happened were like literally starving out the high quality journalism, the premium publisher. One of the key principles that I think the open web should want to support, right? Like high quality, unbiased news and journalism from reputable sources. You're like, yeah, that could be good for
the world,
non-polarization of democracies and
exactly, yeah,
the functioning of a globe. And yet, like hundreds of millions, perhaps billions of dollars, through the minor actions, sometimes at the trading level, right, produce this unintended consequence that had really profound effects. And good part is it's on people's radars. I think a lot of people are now kind of aware of those those risks and sort of implications. But that's these are the things we're dealing with now.
And it's the challenge of like the the short term, like I need to hit my quality numbers, right? I need to go for the simplest, the most kind of obvious route, right?
Yep.
And hold on, I'm also a citizen of this world, and like I've got a responsibility as a corporate, as a person, right? And so, and it's a difficult trade-off, right? Do you feel like this trade-off? Because I mean, a lot of the dominant players have become dominant because they've had amazing execution and they made everything so simple that people wouldn't think twice, because as you said, it was 5%, 10% of their revenue, 10% of their investment, and so like, yeah, okay, whatever, give it out to those guys and they'll take care of it, and next thing you know, it's 50% or 70% or 100% of your revenue stream.
Yep.
And you don't control your distribution channel anymore, you don't control your investment mechanism anymore, and you're very dependent. And so that simplicity has led to a challenge for a lot of brands and a lot of media owners who have been locked into kind of dependent relationships because it was simpler, and because like on a short-term basis it makes sense. Do you think the market has a more kind of long-term vision now, or are we still into a short-term kind of paradigm in a way?
Yeah, it's such a deep question. The answer is like back to people are people. So more awareness of the need for long term. No change to the incentives in the system that sometimes produce short-termism.
Yeah.
I think that
that's back to the alignment argument, right? That's the alignment issue. Yeah.
Yes, but I think we have an obligation, and it goes back to your point about trade-offs. I think we have to get to the point where it's clear that there are no trade-offs, right? Because I don't think people are good at the calibration of doing something that feels like it hurts them today in exchange for something long-term. It's sort of the vitamin medicine. Eat right and live longer on the back end. We're primed to be a little bit sort of short-termist, and I think again organizations and quarterly OKRs and things like that tend to exacerbate that. So one of the things that I'll just say what we're doing here is like looking to build the truth set that says hey, it turns out if you advertise on quality media, it may come at some expense of metrics that are flawed, or the counting of those metrics is flawed. Like why do advertisers spend as much as they do on tail and torso impressions, right? And it's like, well, is it really that you're discovering audiences in unexpected places, and there's some delightful moment of serendipity because you're reading some narrow blog and no, it's because you can buy it cheap and blanket a user's frequency such that you overwrite a last click counting methodology in order to take credit for a sale. Like that's it. It's a metrics hack, right?
Gaming. Yeah.
And you literally see it, and so to the extent that you can sort of break that down and find a set of people that are willing to do the work, right, to say, okay, let me actually test, does a quality impression on a premium website located above eye level, viewable, with a gorgeous ad, is that worth 3 times as much as the bottom of the fold high volume refreshed 17 times? Of course it is. So now that I'm like confident in the trade, right, that I can actually pay more to get far more, right, there's no more trade-off, right? Sometimes you got to go up in the org, right? Sometimes you have to make the more principled argument of, yes, there's something that is optimal for the next 90 days, but you need to be able to advertise in 3 years. And one set of choices will produce a constrained or a shrinking footprint for open web, for example. Another one will continue to reward it and grow it such that some of the other challenges you face, in terms of the walled garden trade-offs, for example, are no longer necessary, right? So you do sometimes need to find someone with more of a sort of an investment, posture. But the reality is, like, we're at a place right now where the actual maths there are really no trade-offs. People just need to like be aware. We need to make it easy. That's always a tricky part. And even listening to myself talk, I'm like, boy, oh boy, we got to make that straightforward, right? Like, here's the ROI over time. Here's how we're going to reduce the level of effort. Here's how you can push a button and make it go. But that in and of itself, takes time and work to get to that. It takes a lot of time to get to simple.
Yeah. It's complicated to make things simple, right? Very complicated, right? So let's finish off. We could go on for hours, and I'm not sure people have that long of available time to listen to us. So let's finish on a simple question.
Great.
What are your top 3 tips to make the industry more sustainable, right? To make sure that we can have that conversation again in 10, 20 years. Hopefully we can have the conversation again in 10, 20 years, and be able to look back on the past 20 years and say, well, we've really kind of matured. We've really built something that now is the cornerstone of a, maybe not a half trillion, but maybe $1 trillion industry. And it's supporting it's supporting premium journalism. It's supporting quality content, it's supporting access to services and content for people across the world. What do we need to do for that? What are your 3 kind of wishes or ideas or tips for that?
I guess I had, as you were talking and asking, I had 3 ways I might approach it. So that is not a simple answer. I think I would start with getting started. So like, simplest thing is, hard to fall off a floor, journey of 1,000 miles, single step, 2 good times to plant a tree, 20 years ago and today. Like, there's a whole bunch of like adages that just say, just get going. Like, there's no bad answer. You'll be 5 or 10 degrees off of, perfect, but off you go. It's again, one of the reasons why we, have been sort of promulgating these, source principles and publishing a source scorecard. It's not necessarily that they're absolutely perfect. But having something in place that is like, okay, here's my accountability roadmap, here's my addressability roadmap, here's my alignment roadmap. Maybe there's one other thing that you wish you was on there, but at least having a framework that allows you to sort of tie the work to a roadmap and to some destination, not just for yourself, but for others, I think is important. So just pick a framework and be like, that's what I'm building toward, right? And you can tell your peers and you can tell your partners and you can tell your finance department, like, this is what I'm trying to achieve and why. I think that's that's important.
Start with yourself.
Just get going. The other one I would say that sort of came to mind is goals, partners, process. I think people, I think, too often start with the inputs as opposed to the outcomes that they're looking to achieve. And that makes sense in a market where like a lot of the work is in the plumbing and is in the how. And again, I'm prone to this myself. But like, if you zoom back and it's like, okay, why are we marketing again? What goals are we trying to drive? Right? How do we count the right stuff in the right way? Starting at the other end sometimes I think can sometimes be freeing. I think you are acknowledging in the market right now, fewer, deeper partners are better. Right, the problems are complicated enough. The need for collaboration across categories and companies is enough that you want fewer companies with more heft that are able to do that. I think, as a sort of a general rule, as well as sort of specialist middleware players that make all of those interconnections easier. Right, so you kind of have a T-shaped strategy or a sort of innovation at the edge. Right, a fewer set of bigger platforms that then allow for easy either distribution on top of or capabilities built into, knowing that those things can get adopted and sort of disseminated, at scale. And then, yeah, so you figure out who you're going to trust. You be really honest about what you're trying to accomplish. Be really clear and transparent about your goals and your constraints. It's like what you do if you're appropriately maturing an industry and being like, all right, I know I'm trying to build a house. I've got, I need a handful of good, trades and contractors. And I want to tell you not just what the architectural renderings look like, but I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I want to use the space. And I'm going to expect this group of people is going to come together and actually build me a home that I'm happy to live in. Like that's where we are, sort of industry wide. So take some of the very human metaphors, like just take your own experiences and be like, how would you do it if you were building a house, and apply it. Make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely, and that's a great metaphor. That's a great way to conclude the podcast. So, thank you very much for that discussion, Joe. It was really fascinating and always a pleasure.
Total pleasure. Thank you for doing this, and onward.
And thank you listeners. Thank you for those of you who have been watching, and we'll see you next time.